Welcome. My name is Jessica Chung, and I'm an admissions officer at the Stanford Graduate School of Business MBA Admissions Office. Welcome to our Diversity and Leadership Ask an Admissions Officer event. We are so excited to welcome you here today. So I'm joined by two of my MBA admissions colleagues, Julianne and Allison. I'll let them introduce themselves. Julianne and Allison, if you would like to share your role and how long you've been a part of the Stanford community, and that's a good icebreaker question. Your favorite place to get lunch on campus, perhaps.
Well, I can start. My name is Julianne. I am so excited to meet with all of you today and chat. I've been at Stanford for just over 4 years and with the GSB for just over 2. So I am well equipped to answer some questions about Stanford, California. I moved from the East Coast to California 4 years ago. So questions about that, I'm happy to answer. My role, I'm an assistant director and I work most closely with our admitted students. So I do all of the typical responsibilities of an admissions officer, from recruiting, reading applications, but my primary focus is once you're admitted, I'll be working with you to get you really connected with the community. And my favorite place to eat on campus is actually Arbuckle, which is the main dining center at the Night Management Center. So when I was hired at the GSB, I was extra excited that I was going to be working right across the buildings from Arbuckle. It's awesome.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison. Happy to be with you this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are. I've been with the GSB for a number of years and have had a variety of roles in operations and evaluation, and currently working in a marketing role, and where we're doing all the communications with you. So of course we love to hear how well we're doing that. And I love coffee, total coffee snob. So like a lot of people this week, probably my favorite place is Coupa Cafe.
Awesome, thank you both. And I'm Jessica. I've been in the MBA admissions office for 2 months and a couple days now. So I'm excited to be learning alongside a lot of our attendees today. I'm on our outreach team, so working with prospective students. I help with our online recruitment events. I also help manage some of our fellowship programs. So I'm super excited to be here today to learn from the best in the business, Julianne and Allison, alongside you all today. I also want to acknowledge that we have a number of our colleagues on the line as well who are greeting you, who might be helping us answer questions in the Q&A box. And if you have any additional questions after this session, please feel free to reach out to our office, check out our website. We are always, always, always ecstatic to talk to prospective students such as yourselves. So please feel free to reach out to us. This session will truly be driven by your questions. So please begin submitting your questions for us via the Q&A box. We are so excited to be here. Really, our only item on the agenda is to answer your questions. So please send them our way. While I'm giving you all a moment to start thinking about and submitting your questions, I can go ahead and ask a couple of commonly asked questions to our panelists. Let me see. If I could just ask our panelists to give us a quick overview of our admissions philosophy, especially holistic admissions. I know that this can be unfamiliar for a lot of our applicants. So Julianne and Allison, if you could share what is holistic admissions and what does that mean for how we evaluate MBA applications?
I can take a stab. As the name implies, holistic admissions means we look at everything. And as those of you who've looked at our application, you've seen there's lots of different pieces to it, and employment and what you majored in and extracurriculars. And there's no formula, so there's no weighting to what those different aspects of your profile entail. And I personally sort of like to think of it almost like a mosaic, where all these many different pieces, essays, recommendations, work history, they're all kind of like little jewels in this mosaic. And for each person, a different jewel kind of sparkles, brighter. So for every single person, the mix is different. And also everything wouldn't be, exceptional, because why would you need to go to business school if everything was already, exceptional? So we really do look at each person individually, and we sort of weave the threads together of the different aspects of your profile.
Awesome, thank you. I think that's so well said. I think a common misconception about selective admissions generally is that people have to be perfect, but I think, Allison, you're exactly right. We don't expect perfection. Nobody's perfect. So that's really, really well said. Thank you.
And, I would just add, I think for our international applicants, we realize that your educational systems are quite different, where it probably is just based on what score you got in the standardized national tests and what your GPA was. And so it is a much more formulaic process. So it may seem a little strange, this holistic process. And even the fact that we ask essays, like why would we need to ask you to write essays to get into an academic program? And that's really because we're not just forming a class of students, we're also forming a community here. And a lot of the learning is going to be from each other. So we actually do care about who you are beyond just your transcript and your standardized test scores.
Absolutely. Julie, anything that you would add?
No, I think Allison's covered it beautifully. I think just said a different way, we're looking at you as the whole package. So there's not one thing, one experience, one test score even that will outweigh all of the things that you'll contribute. So it is, your whole story, your whole self that you'll bring, and all the things that you aspire to do, along with all the things that you've already done and the experiences you've had. So that would be my way of just saying what Allison said in just a different way.
Awesome, thank you. That actually is a great segue to a number of the questions that are coming in the Q&A box. There are a lot of questions about test scores and the GMAT, a couple questions about folks who have taken the test multiple times. So could you say a little bit about how do we evaluate a student's academic aptitude, particularly the test scores, and sort of how do we think about intellectual vitality when we're evaluating applications?
I'll take a first pass at it, and Allison, please jump in. I think the key piece of intellectual vitality, it does go beyond your test scores and the grades that you've earned in your previous education. It really, the heart of it is the sense of curiosity, this love of learning, this desire to continue expanding your knowledge base and to share that knowledge with people around you. So it's that curiosity. And certainly we are an academic institution. It's a quite competitive academic program. So your academic performance is going to be important, but it's not the end all be all by any means. For those who are concerned about a test score or a GPA, know that we look at both of those components in conjunction with each other. We know that some students, are not great test takers. You might have some test anxiety. You might have had something happen to you on that day of the test that really just didn't exhibit your strongest performance, which is why we also ask for all of your transcripts. Same for your academic history with your previous degrees. You may have had a year that maybe something deeply personal took your attention away from classes and school. Maybe you were working full time, or maybe you had just a difficult transition to starting higher education and your academic journey. And so all of these pieces come together. We know that there are a myriad of factors that might affect a grade or a test score, but that doesn't necessarily indicate your personal intellectual vitality. So it's a combination of many pieces. I think those two, test scores and your transcripts, are probably the primary place, but certainly your curiosity, your love of learning can come out in many, many other places throughout your application. So, don't just focus so narrowly on those two pieces. Know that we're again, looking at everything and trying to identify different places where you've shown an interest and a passion for learning and continuing to expand your own knowledge.
I would just add to that, as Julianne said, we look at the test scores and your academic background in context. And so as Julianne mentioned, it might be influenced by maybe you were the first person in your family to go to college, or maybe you were working your way through college. That also in terms of those test scores, you know, if you're a history major, we're going to expect that probably that GMAT quant score is going to be different than it would be for maybe an electrical engineering major. Or if your first language is not English, we're certainly not going to expect the verbal score on those tests to be the same as it would be for a native speaker. So we do look at all of these metrics, you know, in the context of your particular situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I've been sitting on webinars this whole week, I think, I'm trying to remember who said this, but somebody was saying how your chances of being admitted are mathematically infinitely greater if you apply than if you don't apply. So don't count yourself out. I think especially if you feel as though Stanford is the right fit for you, could be the next step on your path. Don't count yourself out because of your test scores. I think, as Julianne said, ultimately we're trying to get a sense of, can you do the work at Stanford? And there are a lot of different ways that we think about that beyond the test scores. And I will also add, there is a optional additional information section. It is 100% optional, so do not feel any pressure to fill that out. But if you have experienced any of those extenuating circumstances that have affected your test scores or have affected your GPA or your grades, feel free to use that space to let us know. I mean, ultimately, we're trying to reconstruct your experiences, reconstruct your perspective for our evaluation process. So the more information we have about the context and circumstances you've experienced, the better it is for us, the easier it makes our job. So feel free to use that space if you need it.
Jessica, I'd also just like to emphasize how important academic, your attitude is, as well as your aptitude. You know, you may be somebody who doesn't have the highest, you know, GRE scores, but it comes through in the recommendations that at work, you're really the thought leader. You're the person who challenges other people's ideas. And so, you know, things like that go way beyond just, you know, metrics.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So there are a few questions about the impact of COVID-19 on the admissions process and on the admissions and enrollment process. So can you say a little bit about how that might be affecting the evaluation process and the sort of admissions numbers?
Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is that we haven't changed any of our admission requirements. We still require tests. I know that in some places across the world, it might be a little bit more challenging to get your test scores. I hope that's been easing and getting a little bit more accessible, but certainly if you're still facing any difficulties, please reach out to our office. We do require those tests, so all of the application components are the same. We are looking for the same criteria. So if you've sat in on any other sessions, you may have seen that we really are focusing on your intellectual vitality, your demonstrated leadership potential, and your personal qualities and contributions. And certainly you may have had new experiences this past year that you'll be able to add into your application. But for the process itself, that has remained the same. The one piece that is different this year is the interviews. They're all going to be virtual, at least for the foreseeable future. We don't want to risk exposing you or exposing any of our alumni interviewers to the COVID-19, and certainly don't want to put any pressure on applicants to feel that, you know, some have an in-person interview while others have a virtual. So everything will be virtual until further notice. And actually that has opened up many opportunities for us to expose applicants to a greater proportion of our alumni interviewers now that we're not bound by geography. And so those would be, I think, as those of you who are applying, just the things to keep in mind. It's very much the same as previous years. In terms of numbers, you know, I think it's stayed relatively the same. We're still looking to admit the same amount for the incoming class in the future. So I would say, you know, it's always been a competitive process. It's still a challenging place to get in, but You're sitting here, you're doing all of your research to really feel comfortable and confident. And, we're expecting to enroll the same amount of students in the future, in future classes. Allison, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't think so. I mean, there's certainly Julianne and her team, dealt with situations that were specific to COVID this year. Some people had issues with getting visas, and some people were in COVID specific work where they really needed to stay on the job. So I think some of those things that were just specific to COVID that.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you both. And I'll just quickly add, we absolutely do not want to penalize applicants for things that are beyond their control. So I know some folks have written to our office with concerns about being laid off from their jobs because of the pandemic and the economic fallout because of it. And this is, I think, as hopefully is clear from this panel, this is a very human process. Your application is reviewed by human beings who I think understand the world that we live in and want to be your advocates in this process. So we're absolutely not in the business of penalizing people for things that are beyond their control, this pandemic included.
Yeah, we honestly are looking for reasons to admit you. We're not trying to find reasons to deny you. It's not that kind of approach at all.
Absolutely. So there are a few questions about deferred admission. Julianne, this is probably right in your wheelhouse. If you can share with attendees first, what is deferred admission? And then what does that mean for students who are interested in that option?
Sure. So I'm going to focus on the college deferral program. So this is really intended for students who are in your senior year, or maybe you've gone straight from undergrad into your graduate program and you actually don't have any significant portion of your time working full-time. So you may have had internships, you may have worked part-time, but primarily you've been a student. You have the option to apply as a deferred candidate, which means in your last year of your academic program, you'd apply to the GSB knowing that you wouldn't be coming that term, you'd be coming in a future term. Typically, it's a year to 2 years, and we would let you know which year you've been offered, and that will give you the opportunity to work for a year or two prior to coming to business school, get a little bit of experience under your belt so you can feel, ready to contribute to the conversations in the classroom. I would say for college seniors, primarily they're applying in round 3, and you would, it's the end of your senior year typically. You are getting ready to figure out, you might already have some job offers, you may not have a job offer yet, that's okay, but this is something that you would be considering for the future. And I think part of your question, Jessica, was about, the evaluation and how we might look at those candidates. If not, I'm going to assume that that's also a question out there. And for any applicant, not just for those who are applying for the deferred admission, we're looking for the same things: that intellectual vitality, demonstrated leadership potential, and personal qualities and contributions. I'm sure we'll say it multiple times throughout the session, but what we're looking for remains the same regardless of where you are in your career, whether you're a student or whether you've had 10, 15 plus years of experience. However, we're not assuming that somebody who's had college, just work coming out of college, had a couple internships, will have had the same trajectory or impact that someone who's, 10 years, 4 years, 5 years into their career. Same goes for if you are 3 or 4 years into your career, we're not expecting you to have had the same trajectory or impact yet as someone later on in their career. So you're all looked at where you are in your own employment trajectory. The impact that you have as a student, we might be looking more at your internships, at your what you've done maybe inside the classroom at your university, your extracurricular impact. We're going to still look for those qualities and contributions, but we may not find them in your employment history because maybe you've only had a 3-month internship. So you're evaluated within the context that you're coming from. I think Allison mentioned this in the academic piece as well. The same goes for your work history. You're still contributing in some way, and we're just finding it maybe in different places or coming up in different ways.
I'm not sure if we said it, but the deferred enrollment is available not just to people graduating from college, but graduate programs as well.
Yes, yes. And I'll say that this is separate from students who are currently working and applying and then might need to have a deferral later. So we expect that you'll apply in the year that you intend to come. We do not grant deferrals just because it's, you have a new promotion or a new job that's come up and you want to really pursue that. Deferrals in that circumstance are very rare. They really are focused on, required military service. If you've had an illness and you now need medical attention that you didn't previously need when you were applying, maybe there's a family circumstance that's arisen, or perhaps you've now earned a Fulbright, or you have the opportunity to pursue a different academic pursuit. But that deferral is very different. So I think as you're applying, make sure you're applying in the year that you intend to come, and know that it is not common to be able to change that year after you've already been admitted. We ask you to reapply if you are no longer able to come that year.
Great, thank you both so much for those responses. Sort of related, well, at the other end, we do have a few questions about reapplicants as well, which Julianne, you mentioned. So for students who might be applying to the GSB for the second or an additional time, our attendees are wondering, how do you update your application from the prior year? Is the current application compared to your prior application? Any advice on how to navigate the process as a reapplicant, I think would be very welcome from our attendees.
Yeah, I can start. We make the decision based on your new application. And first of all, you should know every class has reapplicants in it. So it's not unusual to get admission as a reapplicant. Some of the aspects of the application, like for example, the essays, we ask you what matters most and why is the first essay. And of course, that's a pretty profound question. And so whatever it is that matters most to you, that may not have changed in a year or two since you applied before, but your perspective on it may have changed with another year or two of life and work experience. So you can certainly write about the same subject. Same with the second essay, why Stanford, your reasons may fundamentally be the same, but your perspective on it may have changed. So, you certainly want to take a fresh look at those. In terms of the recommendations, if it's appropriate, you could certainly use the same people. You may have the same supervisor, but you would want them to write a fresh recommendation. It doesn't help you for them to sort of copy and paste what they wrote before. But as I say, we base the decision on your new application. We're not sitting there, comparing them to what you previously said. I don't know, Julianne, what would you add there?
No, I think that's very well said, Allison. I heard in Will's session on the application essay on Wednesday morning, I thought he said this very well of, really taking it with fresh eyes. We are looking at your application with fresh eyes. And so we know that some things may not change in your application, but we're also not comparing year to year. So I encourage you who are reapplying to just really take the time to start fresh and see it as a new application. Allison mentioned you might have new perspectives. And as you go through it in a new, really taking it from scratch, you might find that you have new insights that you previously didn't see or know as you're applying. So just take it seriously. Know that there's no, mark against you by reapplying. There's certainly reapplicants who are admitted and thrive at the GSB. So it's certainly not a negative to be reapplying.
Yeah, I would just add that I think the advantage in a way of being a reapplicant is you can take another look at your application with a critical eye. And, when we read applications, there's the applicant and there's the application. And so often, you may be, a wonderful applicant, but it just didn't come through in the application. So as a reapplicant, you have another chance to really look at that application and say, do I really hear my voice in these essays? Am I really conveying, my whole self in this application?
And just tactically, you do need to start a new application. So you can't just resubmit or update your previous one. You do need to start fresh, start from scratch. You might be able to pull some things and copy and paste if you've saved it elsewhere, but fresh application from the beginning and filling out each field individually.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for those words of wisdom. We have a few questions coming in as well about letters of recommendation. So some folks have asked, what makes a great letter? Does the position of the recommender matter? And overall, how should recommenders approach those two questions that we ask them to respond to? So perhaps we could start with, what are those two questions that we ask recommenders to respond to, and then go into what makes a great letter of recommendation.
So I might not be quoting them word for word, the questions from the recommenders, but the idea behind it is, how does this applicant compare to other people in similar positions or roles? And then the second primary question we ask is, can you tell us about a time that you've given critical feedback, or some areas for improvement? And I think those are very standard questions. The recommenders will also receive a questionnaire that they can fill out to kind of give some perspective on different qualities and skills that you might have. But really their time will probably be most spent in the writing piece of the letter. And I think the letters that are most helpful are from the people that know you best. So in that way, title or position, role in the company or institution, or even GSB affiliation, if it's a GSB alumni, any of those things that you might think could be impressive or sway us, if that person doesn't know your work exceptionally well and know you in detail and can provide specific examples about what you've done and how you've done it, those letters, if they're far removed from you, are not going to be as insightful or as helpful for us. So my best piece of advice is to choose people who know your work inside and out, who can speak to not only your accomplishments, but the challenges that you faced and how you overcame them. Those folks, regardless of their title, regardless of whether or not they've been part of the GSB community, are going to be able to provide a much clearer picture of the work that you've done, and will be able to give us more detail than maybe someone who's further removed. And that detail is really what's most helpful as we're trying to understand the impact that you've had in a variety of spaces.
I think the most painful thing for us when we read a recommendation is, we might read a recommender who says, Julianne is the greatest person we hired in the last 5 years, end of answer, with no supporting examples. So as Julianne said, you really want to make sure that the person knows you well enough to be able to provide specifics, anecdotes, examples, details that support their assertions. And part of that, is not just knowing you well, but actually having the willingness and the time to write a recommendation like that. So another suggestion is, when you're thinking about your recommenders, invite them out to coffee or tea, have a chat with them about why you're going to business school. And, if you detect any reluctance, maybe they are going to be really busy for the next 3 or 4 months, let them off the hook. Because it's hard to turn down someone who's asking you to write a recommendation, but I think we get these one-sentence answers when maybe the recommender just frankly didn't have time to do it justice. So you do also want to manage your recommenders in that aspect of making sure they have the time and the willingness to write you the recommendation you deserve.
Right. And I think so some tactical pieces of advice as well. We do ask that one of your recommendations is from a current supervisor. And there might be circumstances where that's not feasible for you. You might be self-employed, you might be working for a family member, and maybe it's just not appropriate to have your mom write your letter for you.
It's not appropriate. I can tell you that.
It's not appropriate. You might also be in a situation where, by disclosing that you're considering business school, you might be putting your employment or perhaps a bonus or a raise or promotion at stake. And there are many people who are applying in that situation where they just don't want their employer to know that they might be considering leaving. So know that that's common and know that's okay, but you do still need to think about who else might be a good stand-in for that current direct supervisor. So thinking about somebody who has supervised your work, so directed what you've done or to the best possible way. So for example, if you're running your own company, maybe it's a competitor, maybe it's a board member, maybe it's an investor, a client even. So thinking about someone where they've had requested deliverables from you and can provide insight into how you've performed. Those letters are much more helpful than, say, a peer who may not have insight into the overall picture of your performance. They may have just a sliver of information about you. So thinking of who might be the next best person, along with all of the pieces of advice Allison gave. And I think, her advice on just making sure they understand what you're going for and why you're applying to business school can be really helpful in getting some investment from them and ensuring that they are able to spend the time to write that letter thoroughly for you.
Yeah, absolutely. As somebody who's new to the office, and at times I feel like I'm an alien who's been dropped into the process and have had the last few months to observe, I think Julianne and Allison are hitting all of the most relevant points, especially about picking somebody who knows you well and can really provide rich, detailed, vivid examples about your impact, how you solve problems, the results that you've achieved. Those kinds of examples are immensely helpful in the process. So thank you both for those very, very thoughtful answers.
And I just add, these letters are not long, so it sounds like, we're asking you to write this, or you recommend her to write this, tome or something. But I believe the guidance, Julianne, correct me if I'm wrong, is 2 to 4 pages.
Yeah.
So, they're not long.
Yeah, double spaced. So it's not a lengthy piece, but it does still take time on their end to really think thoughtfully about it.
Absolutely. Thank you both. So I'm seeing a few questions about work experience. I'm trying to fold a couple questions together. So some folks have asked about if we have any preferences for the type of work experience, for companies, for tenure in the workforce. So I was wondering if you all could speak to how we think about work experience and sort of the diversity of work experience that we welcome into our community.
Yeah, I think we've said it a few times this morning that a lot of the learning is going to be from each other. We're trying to put together a class with varied perspectives, and work experience is one of those aspects. So it will probably not surprise you to know that we do not expect any particular kind of industry experience, does not have to even be any kind of business experience. I would say probably Stanford, maybe more than some of our peer schools, has probably a larger contingent of what you might think of as non-traditional candidates, where we've had ballerinas in the class, we've had farmers, we've had musicians. One year, I remember we actually had 2 Jesuit priests in the class at the same time. So, no particular background. Same with companies. I think if you look at our class profile, I think we have like 420 students coming from over 300 different organizations. So again, we love the variety of some people coming from Fortune 500 companies, some people coming from family businesses and startups. Yeah, no preference there.
Awesome. There are a couple questions too about work tenure. Do you have any advice for, since we've talked a little bit about folks who have no work experience or a few years of work experience, do you have any advice for people who are applying perhaps a decade out of their undergraduate experience, who have more work experience?
Well, one thing to note, if you do have more than 8 years of experience, you are also eligible for the MSX program. And I don't know if all of you are aware, but if you are considering both programs, you can use the same application. So you're not having to submit 2 different applications. There's a couple differences, but quite minor in the grand scheme of applying to Stanford. But, I think it's really the same concept as we've talked about for all different populations, regardless of where you are in your employment experience. We're looking at those same 3 themes and thinking about where, the impacts you've had in that point in your career. your experiences might be different at that level. Maybe you are managing people, maybe you are taking a strategic look at the direction of your organization or your team, but maybe not. Some industries, that's really not the track, that's really not the way that you're going. So it very much varies on the industry you're in, I'd say, as well as the types of roles you're having. So, that doesn't mean though that we expect you to have had executive or leadership experience at that time, certainly not, but you may have. And that will be very different than somebody who's earlier on in their career. So for us, there's no preference. We really see all of your experiences as something that will contribute and add to the diversity of thought within the class. And so I think, just apply with confidence, knowing that you've had an incredible journey and story, and you'll be able to contribute a very different lens than maybe someone who's earlier on in their career. But I think the benefits and gains that you'll get from the program, if this is the 2-year program that really makes sense for you, are going to be just as impactful as someone who's earlier on in their career.
Yeah, and again, I would just emphasize that we look at you in context. So you as a middle manager with 10 years of experience and some direct reports, that's a certain kind of impact, but you may be applying as a college senior and your impact in your summer internship was, off the charts for someone in, summer internship at your career stage. So we're looking at impact, your situation, your career stage, your industry, your functional area. So always in context.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much. There are a couple questions about the resume component of the application. Some folks are wondering about the format, the length. I believe we say a 1-page resume. So if you could speak to that part of the criteria. And I'm also wondering if you could share with our attendees, what do you find helpful in a resume? What sort of information do you find most helpful? And any other tips you can give our applicants about how to format and build their resume?
Honestly, I don't know if you agree with me, Julianne, but honestly, you don't need to create a new resume for your business school application. That's probably the one part of the application you've already done, because you're just going to use the resume that you would use for, your work. And obviously, you're going to have it most up to date. But, and if it is more than 1 page, we really would like you to get it down to 1 page. I think the one exception would be if you do have more than 10 years of work experience, you could have more than 1 page, but there's no need to do any format than what you already have.
I think just adding off of that, I completely agree, Allison. But thinking about the different places that you can share your story in the application, we do ask for your employment history, and we ask for what your role is and what your accomplishments are. So if we're looking at all of it. So if that's already included elsewhere in the application, you might choose to use some of that space on your resume to highlight different things that you've done. So what I'm saying is you don't need to repeat the information that's on the employment history that we ask you to fill out. Certainly it should mirror your trajectory, the different roles you've had, your responsibilities should be mirrored, but you have essentially now additional lines to give some more context about the work that you've done. If you take out maybe the 2 or 3 lines you may have had that you put on to our questionnaire. So I think that could be one way to think about it. I completely agree, though. You do not need to make a special resume for us. We are just interested in seeing, what you've done and how you've made impact in your different roles. So take that as you will. Don't put extra pressure on yourself to change it. But know that if you want to highlight different things, that you could do that too on your resume.
Yeah, it might be helpful maybe to talk a little bit about how we use the resume. I mean, when I'm reading an application, I'm sort of using the resume as sort of a quick overview so I can kind of get the big picture. And then I go to the employment history and really dive deep, because in the employment history, for those of you who, looked at the application, you've got way more real estate to describe your specific duties and responsibilities, way more than you would ever have on a resume. You also have some, interesting questions like most significant achievement, where again, you've got a chunk of space there that you can write. And so it's just a, much more detailed, deeper dive in the work history.
Awesome. Thank you both for these really thoughtful answers. There's a question in here that I think might be fun to answer. What are some common blunders? That was the word you used. What are some common blunders or mistakes that you see in the application process, and what sort of advice you have for avoiding those common mistakes?
I bet, Julianne, you have some favorites. So why don't you go first, and then I'll add some of my favorites.
I mean, honestly, it's just not answering the question in full. I mean, it for as much time and build up there is through this application process that I know you're thinking about and deciding to choose to apply to Stanford or other schools, taking the test, it always surprises me when people don't answer the question or don't answer it in full. So really read it, know that some of our questions have multiple parts. For those of you who haven't applied yet, start early, because sometimes our questions prompt further questions as you fill them out that may not be visible when you're initially opening the application. And I can certainly tell when someone was filling this out the day before it was due, and now I'm seeing really detailed answers at the high level, and then the further questions, it's one line, maybe spelling errors. So give yourself enough time, fully answer the questions, making sure that you're capturing all parts of the question, because for me, I find that very difficult to fully understand in that way, just because there is so much invested in this process on your end. So making sure that you really are giving yourself enough time to answer the questions in full. That would be my biggest piece of advice. I've seen it time and time again. And it's not just the essay questions that would be, I know we've done the workshops before, but really making sure we're asking you what we actually want to know. So we really do want to know what matters most to you and why. We really do want to know, what are your job responsibilities for this particular role? We're asking you very specifically, so don't try to assume that we're trying to get a different answer from you or that it's a trick question. Answer the question and answer it in full. Allison, that would be my piece. What about you?
Yeah, I think the trick question goes to that often, you might be overthinking the question when we ask what matters most to you and why. We're really asking that. And I think the common blunder I see there is sometimes people end up kind of writing a mini autobiography of themselves. And that's not actually the question. The question is what matters most to you and why. And I think we mentioned with the recommenders, sort of the one sentence answers, which again, you don't have complete control over, but I think that's part of, managing your recommender. And then I guess the other one is the, using an essay for another school and trying to, gonna squeeze it in and make it fit this question, even though it doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I think has been said in a number of other sessions, authenticity is so important to this process. And if you are trying to pose as who you think we want to read about, then I think that is also a common application blunder. Our goal in this process is to get to know you, not somebody who you think we want to admit. So be authentic, be true to yourself. You are the person we're interested in learning about. So I think definitely take that time to reflect and to fill out your application thoughtfully and reflect on these questions really thoroughly.
I'm so glad you said that, Jessica, because it's one that's, I think, hard to talk about, but as one of our colleagues say, it's like only you can be the best you that you can be. So, you really sort of cheat yourself if you're trying to sort of package and everything is so perfect, it's just not even believable. And after reading, tens of thousands of these applications, we can sort of pick up if it's just everything is so packaged. It doesn't seem like where's the real person here? So good advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think related to that, we have a couple questions about the essay. I know we had a couple of fantastic application essay workshops earlier this week, one of which was led by Julianne. But I think folks are wondering, especially as they're navigating the application process, trying to think about how to tell their stories, advice on how applicants should pick their essay topic, especially for that infamous "what matters most to you and why" essay.
Yeah, I think our application workshops are, the videos are going to be posted as well. So if you did miss that workshop, check out the videos. I think they'll be up in about a week or so. I guess I would start as just saying that what matters most, the topic you choose, whatever it is that matters most to you, we're not sitting in judgment of that topic. And so, you may pick something from your professional life, you may pick something from your personal life, it may be something part of your spiritual life, it may be an idea or an ideal that is the most important thing to you. So just don't get hung up on what the topic is. You truly want to pick something that is close to your heart, resonates with you, is a good vehicle, frankly, to convey to us your influences, your passions, your values. And so probably that kind of question, you're going to spend some time ruminating over what that is before you hit the keyboard and start writing, because it is a pretty profound question. And I think Julian and I have both talked to applicants who were denied, and they said that still that exercise, that experience of self-examination in answering this essay was very useful to them. And again, I just want to mention for our international applicants, it may just seem like total lunacy to you of like, why would you need to be answering this kind of question to get into an academic program? But a lot, there's going to be a tremendous amount of personal and professional growth you're going to have over those 2 years. And so we are looking for people who are open to self-reflection and open to challenging themselves. And so the application is the first step in that, in terms of you really reflecting on yourself.
And I will just add, in addition to Allison saying we're not sitting in judgment of the topic, we are also not expecting any particular topic. So I think, Jessica, part of your question was how do we choose what to write about? These are both very personal questions, including why Stanford. While that might seem like maybe a more superficial or high level question, it actually is quite personal, because we really want to understand what about it specifically about Stanford's program is going to contribute to your journey, your goals, your aspirations. So beyond just being California and beautiful weather or Silicon Valley, what is it specifically about our program that aligns with your goals? And so you do need to think about what you ultimately want out of the GSB, what you ultimately want out of Stanford. Those for that particular essay, that is where it's most impactful, is really aligning the program to what you ultimately want to achieve. And so I think just taking the time to really be with yourself and reflect, that is going to be key, whether you're choosing, what matters most to you and why, or why Stanford, and that will be the starting place for your writing process. And, high level with the application workshop, I think you can use this for both essays, but really just continuing to dig deep into why. Just posing that question to yourself over and over again to really, uncover all of these different layers of either what matters most to you or why Stanford. And that should give you a really good writing process to kind of get to the heart, present your authentic self, and still being honest throughout the application process.
Absolutely. Thank you both so much.
Yeah. Can I add one more thing, Jessica? Again, I'm thinking of international applicants who might be worrying a little bit about, like, does this essay have to be so perfect because English is my second language? And again, you're not applying to, an English master's degree or a creative writing program. This is a business school program. So we're really focused on the content. We're not concerning ourselves about, syntax errors or anything like that. I mean, of course, you're going to run spell check on your essay, but please don't be concerned at all about writing style or grammatical mistakes or things like that. We're focused, totally on the content.
Awesome. Thank you both so much. My favorite proofreading tip. So I used to work in undergraduate admissions. So this might feel sort of basic, but I always would recommend reading your essay out loud. Number one, because it helps with reading, because I think it can really help with checking to make sure your essay sounds like you. Like if you're writing something that doesn't sound like you can really tell when you read it out loud in your voice. So that would be one of my concrete tips for approaching the essay. There's a great question in here about how much clarity applicants should have about their job goals or their post-MBA plans.
That's a good one. Yeah, that sort of goes along with the Why Stanford essay, doesn't it? People worry about that in that Why Stanford essay, they have to have their whole life figured out, their whole career figured out. And that's not true at all. We know that you're coming here to explore. And in fact, the vast majority of our students are going to change careers in some aspect of functional area or geography or industry or something. But we do want you to help us understand how you're going to use the Stanford experience to help you explore. And it may be exploring, particular industry. It may be a hypothesis about yourself that you want to test while you're here. So it could really be anything. And the reason we do want to know that you have spent some time thinking about this is when you come to Stanford, I mean, you're like in this huge, confectionery shop where there's just hundreds of courses you can take, in fact, across the entire university, and extracurriculars, and there's so much here, and there's no way you could do it all. And so at least having some kind of filter for yourself in terms of being able to filter and a lens to make choices of like, how are you going to know what classes you want to take outside the business school unless you have some sense of what you're exploring here.
Awesome, thank you. So I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. There are a couple of really great questions in the Q&A box about past career pivots. So some folks might be coming to GSB to pivot, and there are some folks who have pivoted once, twice, multiple times before applying. So do you have any advice for applicants about how to explain past career pivots, how to frame those experiences, anything related to pivoting your career prior to business school?
Well, within our application form itself, when we're asking to fill out your employment history, we also ask the reason why you left each role. So that would be a really good place, I think, to provide a sentence or two about what ultimately, propelled you to change careers. It's not a ton of space, but actually it's quite effective in seeing like, I moved from investment banking because I wanted to have a greater impact in my community. Something, you can pretty much give us the high level reason for why, and we don't need to know more detail than that, because we'll then go on to see the impact that you've had and how you've built upon the skills that you've acquired. We know that not every career is linear. Many careers, spiral and pivot and turn, and so it's very normal. We're not, questioning like, wow, this looks strange. Why did they move from this to that? That's not it. We do want to understand why, and maybe what gave you that ultimate boost, or that sparked that interest in that new career for you. We also expect that you'll probably change directions after business school, or once you're here. We're not going to be holding you to what you said you wanted to do in your application when you graduate. We know that you're going to be filled with different opportunities and options to explore. So just if there is a situation where you really want to give more context, I think the additional information could be a great place. And you might be able to find places to work that change in, maybe in the optional impact questions. It might come up in some of your essays, but it doesn't have to. So there are a couple places, but really for me, I think one or two sentences and why you left that role is sufficient for the vast majority of changes.
Absolutely. I'm coming back to what Allison said at the beginning of the session, which is we don't expect you to be a perfectly finished, polished product in your application. If you had already achieved everything there was to achieve, why would you apply to business school? So I think, yeah, absolutely. We understand that life happens, your values and your goals change and shift and evolve. So yeah, I think you both have hit it on the head.
And I
So
think I think most of us would agree that you often learn more from your quote unquote failures than from your successes. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a panelist in a session I went to earlier this week said, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn. And I love that. I want to get it tattooed on my forehead. So next time you see me on one of these webinars, it might be on my forehead. Let me see. I think we've hit a lot of the big questions that have come in. I know we only have a few minutes left. So we are going to launch a poll for our attendees. We would really love to know how your experience has been in this session. It's been sort of a novel year for us doing all of this online. So if you could please submit your feedback, we would really, really appreciate it. And I'm wondering from our panelists if you have any last few words of advice, anything that we haven't covered that you think applicants should know about this process.
I guess I would just say, you know, there's so much information and misinformation and myths out there, and you can sort of drive yourself crazy trying to follow everyone else's advice. So I would just say in this process, to the best that you can, sort of put blinders on, block out all the urban myths, and just focus on yourself and the process, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I completely echo what Allison said. Just, you know, it takes a breath, be confident. We really are looking to understand your accomplishments and how you've approached challenges, and really to get to know you. So we're excited to get to know more about you as you apply. We're looking for reasons to admit you, not to deny you. And we're just really interested in hearing about all of the amazing things and contributions you've had into your different spaces. So just be confident, be excited. This is a chance for you to tell your story in a way that's empowering to you. And we can't wait to get to meet you one day, hear your stories.
Yeah, we're in this line of work because we're truly excited and we love getting to know you through your application. So we sincerely look forward to reading about you.
Absolutely. And I think we all know that this process can be very anxiety inducing, but also know that this is not a process you have to go through alone. You have, I think part of this process is finding those mentors and allies and advocates who are in your corner, willing to write that letter of recommendation, willing to proofread your essay, willing to practice interviewing with you. So draw on those people in your life who are in your corner. And we're in your corner too. If you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to our office. We are in your corner. We give this advice for free. So know that you can always reach out to our office if you have any remaining questions. So with that, thank you all so much for joining us today. A huge thank you to my colleagues as well for your thoughtful responses to our attendees' questions. And you can continue your journey at mystanford.mba and learn more about the events we offer, life at Stanford GSB, and continue to connect with us. So thank you all so much for being here, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.